I think I'd be ignorant to say that Christianity is the only right religion. I don't know what the right religion is. It's just what I believe it is.
Some people that I've met, I've had friends, and the minute they find out about me, or the minute that I do anything that doesn't follow their religion, they don't want anything to do with me.
There's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad that can come out of it. And I'm not sure if it's from religion that the bad or the good comes out of it, or whether it's the people.
I respect a lot of faiths, and I think that Christianity is the pillar that's influenced by the other great religions in the world.
La cristianidad es muy importante porque podemos aprender valores cristianos donde donde descubrimos más acerca de nosotros.
My view on anyone who claims to have a monopoly on truth is that there's no one truth about anything. I think that a lot of religions say the same thing in different ways.
Well, hey, good morning. How you guys doing? Beautiful day out there, am I right? Golly, what a great day for a barbecue. And to be here together, as Ashley said, we're nearing the end of this series called The Big God Questions, the most Googled questions about God, faith, and Christianity. And so before we jump in today, I just want to let you know, in 2 weeks, you should probably know this, it's Mother's Day. If you're hearing that for the first time, you're welcome. 2 weeks is Mother's Day, and we are kicking off for Mother's Day a brand new series that I'm really kind of pumped about called Mama Didn't Raise No Fool. It's a series that's based on wisdom from this document, this famous document from the Hebrew Scriptures called the Book of Proverbs, this document of wisdom. So gaining wisdom from the Proverbs and from Mom. And we're kicking it off on Mother's Day because, like, hey, who doesn't need a little bit more wisdom, right? Who doesn't want to be wiser in life? That would solve a lot of things for all of us. And we're kicking it off with some great Mother's Day celebrations. Cheesecake Factory on Saturday night, and the crowd last night did a big whoop and applause for that. That's cool. Come out on Saturday night. And then on Sunday morning before both services on Mother's Day, a killer Mother's Day breakfast. And we are talking like over the top. It's so good. And a wonderful Mother's Day photo op all weekend long. Look at that gorgeous family right there. Yeah, you might be thinking, hey, this is a great time to maybe invite some people, and it's going to be a great series. But today is the fifth question in our series, The Big God Questions. We started off on Easter weekend with a great question: who was or who is Jesus? Like, can we even be sure or know that he lived? And if so, what could we actually know about him? Did he think himself or believe himself to be anything more than a great teacher? Why would anyone, or did anyone ever come to think or believe he was more than that? And that's how we kicked off the series. And we backed up the bus a little bit and asked this question: is there a God? I mean, hasn't science disproved that myth once for all? Are there reasons, not just to have faith, you need to have faith and have more faith. Are there reasons to believe or think that there is a God, that in God's existence? And if there is a God, why, oh why, is there so much pain and suffering in the world? Which is the number one most asked question. We talked about it in week 3. And I think it's the most difficult question to answer, not just in a logically satisfying way, because that's actually not so difficult, but in an emotionally satisfying way. That's a much tougher question to answer, and that's a big one. Then last week we looked at this question: can I take the Bible seriously? Can modern educated people really take the Bible seriously? Isn't it full of myths and fairy tales and stories that were made up hundreds of years after the fact? And people have commented to me throughout this series that every one of these questions could be a whole series. Like, there are 4 or 5 different really deep and wonderful and good paths to go down with each one of them. And that really is true. Like, we're just kind of skimming along the surface, and I realize that. And so for this 4th question in particular, we've decided to answer it in a more comprehensive way with a seminar that we're putting on called, here's catchy, What is the Bible? That's what it's going to be about. Like, where did this come from? How do we even get these documents? Who decided they should be in there? Where did they come from? And what are they all about? We're going to answer that as best we can in a few different sessions, beginning Friday, 6 to 8 p.m., May 24th. We're going to serve up pizza. And then on Saturday morning, it continues 9 to 11:30, a couple more sessions. We're going to have coffee and bagels. And we're also having childcare, and so we're going to feed you in more than one way, and we've got kids care too. And so you need to sign up to jump into it. And I'm going to throw a QR code up here, and let's see how quick you are with your phones, how quick on the draw. If you can actually scan this right now, and you can sign up online, you can pay up because it's $10 a person, which is frankly more earnest money than anything else. Doesn't really even cover the expenses, but it just says, hey, yeah, I'm really coming, and you can register for childcare too. And so you can scan that, and some of you are doing that right now, so I'll hold it up there for a second longer. The QR code is also in the program, and you can sign up on our website, ourtabernacle.com/TNU. But today we are talking about yet another one of these really great questions. Isn't Christianity too exclusive? Isn't it too exclusive? Isn't it just kind of wrong to suggest that this particular way, that any way is the right way or the best way to discover or relate to or follow God as he really is? I mean, does that really feel right? What about diversity? What about many paths to God? Rabbi Shmuley Boteach says it this way: I am absolutely against, there's some strong language for you, any religion that says one faith is superior to another. I don't see how that is anything different than spiritual racism. Strong words, but he's kind of known for some strong words. Mahatma Gandhi once said, my position is that all great religions are fundamentally equal. Thought leader, theologian, and philosopher Oprah Winfrey once said, one of the biggest mistakes humans make is to believe that there's only one way. Actually, there are many diverse paths leading to God. And in a world that is more global than ever before, and in a cultural moment that we're in, a cultural moment that, I love this, Joseph Henrich refers to our cultural moment as weird, meaning Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. This weird moment we're in, and by the way, it is a very weird and a very small little weird bubble that we are in terms of the scope and span of history and of culture around the world. We're in this tiny little weird little bubble that we're in, but in this tiny little weird moment, where values of tolerance and diversity and inclusivity are the values above all others, and they really are when you think it through, for any path at all to ever suggest that it is somehow right or even best seems intolerant, disrespectful, arrogant, and quite narrow-minded, right? Timothy Keller, author Timothy Keller is a pastor, author in New York City, passed away a year or so ago. He tells a story of a time he was invited to be the Christian representative on a religion panel at a local college in New York City with a Jewish rabbi and a Muslim imam. And he writes in his book, he says, we all agree that as they're having this conversation on the statement that if Christians are right, that Jesus actually is somehow God incarnate, that God has actually come to us to be among us and to actually die for us. If that is true, they all agreed that Muslims and Jews fail in a serious way to love God as God really is. But if Muslims and Jews are right, that Jesus was merely a teacher or a prophet, then Christians fail in a serious way to love God as God really is. And they all agreed like that would be a true statement. And Keller writes that several of the students were quite disturbed by this. One student insisted that what mattered most was to believe in God and to be a loving person, which, by the way, is not something all religions hold as the most important thing. That's frankly a rather exclusive statement to begin with. And to insist that one faith had a better grasp on truth than others was, quote, intolerant. Another looked at the religious leaders with frustration and said, we will never know peace on earth if religious leaders keep making such exclusive statements. And it struck me as I read Keller's account, his whole account, that in this context, there's an irony to this because the religious leaders were frankly being quite tolerant and civil and respectful of one another in a conversation where people held deeply strong convictions and thought through positions, whereas there were other people in the room that were actually behaving kind of disrespectfully and, if you think about it, kind of intolerantly towards people who held different positions than they did. But that's just me. That's a topic for a different conversation. Whereas, it's just interesting to me, whereas atheism says all religions are false. We've been kind of dealing a little bit with this point of view throughout this series. Inclusivism says all religions are true. All religions are true. And the idea kind of goes like this, and maybe you've heard this at some point in time. In fact, maybe this is your point of view as well, that all religions are basically the same. All religions are basically equal, they're basically true, they're all basically the same. They really only differ on the externals, the peripherals, the things that don't really matter. In reality, that's partly true, but actually mostly false. That many religions have similar, certainly not all, but many religions have some similarities in the externals, if you will. There are certain practices, prayer or meditation or compassion, though that is not equally held among all of the major world religions. Ideas of generosity or giving or almsgiving, which is also quite different, frankly, among the world's religions. There's moral behavior, but even morality and how that's defined differs quite a bit. But there's some kind of similarities within that scope of things, but they differ very significantly at the core, at the why and the what for. And part of what religions in general have in common are a few big ideas that might go like this, that human beings, as we naturally are in our natural state, are somehow separated from, and even this is like, how do you define that? God or the divine or spiritual wholeness or something, but there's something wrong. That we aren't how we could be, we aren't who we could be, we aren't as connected or whole as we want to be, and there's this somewhat universal sense of what has sometimes been described as a God-shaped hole. A God-shaped hole that there's something missing, and religions tend to have that in common, and with that comes a second observation that it has something to do with us, that this separation actually has something to do with us. There's something messed up about us. It's our brokenness, our fear, maybe our ignorance, the list is really long, right? Like you make your list, I'll make mine, am I right? And many of the world's religions hold some of these things in common. There are some similarities. Jesus is notorious for taking a lot of these outward manifestations of what's messed up and really drilling down deep into the subtle counterparts of those things that are deep, deep within us. So it's like my self-pity when I'm not getting what I think I deserve or what I want, my dark spirals of resentment and anger and the way my head goes sometimes, my envy, my jealousy of others, my irrational fears, my reactive anger, my coping mechanisms, my passive aggression, it's the stuff in me. And the word that we sometimes use for this is the word sin. That word, I get it, has a very distasteful, moralizing, judgmental, kind of bitter aftertaste to it. And that really is true. And so how we define it around here all the time is sin is just really everything that's messed up. Everything that's messed up in me, everything that's messed up with me and about me, everything that's messed up around me, everything that's messed up in the world. And here's the thing, and you've already figured this out. There are a lot of things that are just kind of messed up with you. Some of it is because of things that were messed up with others that affected you, right? And what is messed up in you, or I'll put it personally, what is messed up in me always messes up things around me. Am I right? Always messes up. I end up causing a mess because of what's messed up in me. And sin always does this. Sin always separates. It always creates breaks and divisions. If we are correct that we said 2 weeks ago, everything was created for oneness. Everything was created for unity. Everything was created to be whole as God himself is one. Sin is everything that ever breaks any of that, even a little bit. It separates us from others, it separates us from ourselves, and it definitely separates us from God. And there's this common sense that it has something to do with us, and therefore, we need to do something about it. We need to do something to bridge that gap, to restore that connection. And every religion constructs like their own system, if you will, of laws and rules and ceremonies and rituals to reconnect us to God or the divine or the whole or wholeness. It's like, do this, don't do that, eat this, don't eat that, don't eat anything during these days, or don't touch this, touch that, believe these dogmas, pray these prayers, pray them at these times, this number of days, worship in this way, perform these rituals, these ceremonies, these rites, these sacraments, if you will, offer these sacrifices, give these alms, travel on these pilgrimages, read and know and meditate on these sacred texts, whether it's the 6 doctrines and 5 pillars of Islam, or the 4 noble truths and 8-fold paths of Buddhism, the 10 commandments, or actually 613 commandments of Judaism, and frankly, a lot of what gets called Christianity and falls under that umbrella has this same kind of idea. And the hope is, if you do this, and if you do it if you do enough of it and don't do the don'ts and you do the right thing, and if you do it long enough and rightly enough and truly enough and sincerely enough and purely enough, then maybe somehow you can reconnect yourself to God and you can get there from here. Like you can reach paradise or nirvana or Brahman or favor with God or heaven or whatever that means. And then comes the rub. How can you know? How can you know if it was enough? Could it possibly ever be enough? How good is good enough? And this is a problem, frankly, for much of what passes for Christianity. Like, I read a few verses in the Bible. I could have read more. I could have read a chapter. I should have read the whole thing. I prayed for a couple minutes. A couple minutes? I watched Netflix for hours. I prayed for a minute. Like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not giving enough. It's never enough. God is probably disappointed with me. And there's this sense, even within a lot of what passes for Christianity, that I'm not doing enough to get God to be happy with me or to get there from here. And in the end, there really is no certainty, because here's what we know, and I know this about you, and you might as well know it about me. Nobody's perfect. And if God is perfect and we're not, then how much could be good enough? Maybe your good deeds outweigh your bad, but do you have any idea how bad you are? Maybe your acts of devotion and like self-denial and rigor and sacrifice, maybe that's sufficient, but is it? Now, admittedly, I am painting, I gotta say, very complex, nuanced thought systems with a very wide brush, and I realize that. But the early followers of Jesus responded to all of this in the most unreligious way imaginable. In fact, we've said this before, Christianity actually did not begin as a religion or as a new religion. It began kind of as the unreligion, if you will, and then became one, unfortunately. But today I want to look at something that's in a letter written by a guy named Paul of Tarsus. And Paul, as you may know, actually begins his journey as an anti-Christian and an anti-Christ. Truly, partly because of some of the things that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. And then he becomes a passionate follower of Jesus, like hair on fire, following Jesus. And he starts not roaming, actually, it's very intentional, working his way around the especially eastern rim of the Mediterranean world, starting these Jesus communities in these strategic locations. And he would write these letters back. And this is from a letter that he wrote to Roman Christians in 57 AD. And in this letter, he begins by painting this picture of the mess that we're in. And honestly, the mess that we've made. He begins by taking a really long, hard look at that gap that we were looking at and what's really in this gap, and that it's all of us and it's all of us together in it, and how no one is superior and no one can point a finger at anybody else without totally judging themselves, and how devoting yourself to any religious system, and he's speaking of his own religious system that he grew up in, Torah, or God's own laws and rules, like devoting yourself to following all the religious rules ends up just showing us how messed up we actually are, like how deep and dark the hole goes. And then he says, in a key turning point in the letter, he says this: "For no one can ever be made right with God by doing what Torah, what the religious system, what religious laws commands. No one can ever be made right with God in that way." And it's like, what? Did you just say that out loud? He's like, yeah, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. In fact, here's what you already know because of some of the really religious people you've made. You can become more and more religious and actually become a worse human being. Like, how does that work? Then he says this, and this is so brilliant and so true. "Rather, through the law, through this rigorous obedience to it, by trying harder, the more sincerely, the more effortfully, the more purely you try, we actually become more and more aware of just how messed up we actually are, just how deep it does go. We become more conscious of our sin." And here's the very unreligious thing that Paul is saying. He's just saying it straight up. You can't get there from here. Yeah, you can't get there from here, which is not terribly surprising because you were already suspecting that you would never quite be good enough, right? You just didn't expect a really religious guy like Paul to straight up say it out loud. Like, you can't do it. Like, you can't get there from here. But here's the real surprising part. God doesn't even want you to try. God doesn't even want you to try. He doesn't actually want you to try harder and harder to be better and better so that you can somehow be right with him and okay with him. It doesn't work. And part of it is something I call a matter of relational economics. And here's what I'm talking about. One day, a friend of mine and I, who had been talking about God and faith for quite a while, he'd been on this journey for well over a year, just asking great questions. We'd have lunch, we'd have coffee, and we had discussed like a lot of the questions we're even talking about now. Fantastic conversations. I loved it. And one day we're having lunch, and he sits down and he says, okay, I think I'm ready. I'm like, ready? Like, what do you mean? Yeah, I think I'm ready to take that next step. I think I'm ready to be a Christian. But I've got one more question. I'm like, oh, great, one more question. I love the questions. Let's talk about the question. What's your question? He says, I need to know, what am I going to need to change after I become a Christian? I'm like, wait, what's that? Yeah, I want to know, there's some wisdom in this. I want to know the fine print. I want the full disclosure, like in the club, what you guys all know, that like, what am I going to have to change? What am I going to have to change when I become a Christian? And it's an interesting question, but when you think about it, it's kind of a weird question. It's kind of a weird question. So I said, well, let me put it to you this way. Imagine this, Bill, which he thought was weird because his name wasn't Bill, but I come over to your house and I'm like, bro, Bill, I love our connection. I love our conversation. I love hanging out with you, man. I want to be friends. I think I'm ready to become your friend, but I just need to know first, what am I going to need to change once we're friends? Now, you would have to admit, that's a kind of weird question to ask somebody. And you know what would be weirder? Is if Bill had an answer. I'm glad you asked. Reaches into his back pocket, like, flip. Item number one, been meaning to talk to you about this for a while. Like, that would be really weird. Why? Because relationships don't work like that. Certainly healthy relationships. Healthy people, whole people don't relate to one another like that. And so imagine this. Imagine there's a ladder that reaches all the way from earth up into the sky. And let's call this the ladder of emotional or relational wholeness, or the ladder of relational health, okay? This is like the levels or layers of how relationally healthy we are. And like, okay, so where would you put yourself on the ladder? Where would you, just you and me, I'm gonna put us on rung 4, okay? So right there on rung 4, and because here's what, there's people who are probably healthier than you. You've met one or two, maybe, and you know there are people beneath you. And I'm not pointing fingers, but you know that you're not the lowest on the ladder. So, okay, rung 4, that seems safe. Imagine there actually is a God. Little thought experiment, because maybe you're not sure you believe there is. But imagine there is a God who actually created relationships, created human community, created the idea of oneness, is himself relationally one and whole, and actually created, think about this, our capacities for community and attachment, our right brain, our physiological and emotional capacities to be connected and bonded to one another. Imagine such a being exists, and then ask yourself this, where on the ladder do you think that being might be? And it's like, well, probably a lot higher than me, like probably way up there somewhere, right? So here's a question. If you and I, way down here on little old rung 4, if we know that that's not how healthy relationships work, that's not how you relate to people in a healthy way, you don't imagine God thinks it is or operates that way himself, do you? Do you? And part of the problem is that the very act of trying to do things to get to God messes up or taints the deed itself. It's the in order to versus because of paradox. The difference between in order to and because of. And it works like this. As long as I'm on this side of any relationship, but let's say it's my relationship with God, trying to do things in order to get to God, in order to get God to love me or accept me as I am, in order to gain favor with God or connection with God, the very nature of doing those things in order to gain that messes up the thing itself. Think about it this way. Imagine if I were picture me like cleaning my kitchen and washing the dishes every single night in order to get my wife to love me, in order to finally get her to love me or accept me or want to be with me. Imagine me doing that every night in order to. How do you think that's going to work? Some of your ladies like, Well, I wouldn't know. But maybe we could try it as an experiment for 5 or 6 months. It could help. I don't know. Guys, step it up. Come on, you're giving us a bad name. But have you ever been in a relationship where you felt like you were doing things to try to get the other person to like you or want you or love you or to want to be around you? Have you ever felt that lopsidedness of in order to? How did that feel? How did that work in the relationship? And would you call that healthy? It's like, of course not. Now, that doesn't mean that once we're in great relationships, we don't do a lot of things and even change a lot of things for the other person and for the sake of the relationship, right? And so as Bill and I are hanging out, I found out there are certain things he doesn't like. I don't do or say those things when I'm around him. He doesn't want it or doesn't like enjoy certain kinds of foods. We don't go to those restaurants because of the relationship, because I care about Bill and because I care about the relationship. And during this relationship, during this time, he's moved away, but he was a little bit allergic to cats. Okay, and at the time we owned a cat, and so if Bill was coming over to hang out, what did I do? Put the cat away, vacuumed, I would clean, I would kind of wipe down surfaces. Why? Because I care about Bill, because I want him to hang out and have a good experience because of the relationship. Never in order to try to get him to like me, but because he already did, because of the relationship, right? And in the same way, I'm going to clean the kitchen and I'm going to do the dishes all the time, not for my wife, but because we have a great relationship and because I like a clean kitchen and because I love the well-oiled machine that our relationship and like that sense of teamwork and the mutual give and take and the mutual servanthood that just characterizes our relationship. I love that so much. So of course, but always because of, never in order to. You see the difference? And so you might say that God had a problem, though it might feel weird to talk about God having a problem. But here was his problem. The people that God loves were separated from him. The people that God loves were separated from him. And God wants a relationship. He's wanted it from the beginning with all of us, with all of those who are created in his image, this unrestricted relationship of total unity and community and oneness as he himself is one. But something was in the way. It was always in the way. It's like every time we showed up to the relationship, there was this big mess that we've made, this mess that's in us, and the way the mess has affected things around us, it's always on the table. It's always in the middle. And it's like everything we do to try to cope with that, like whether we try to deny it or hide it or clean it up or overcompensate, well, I'll do this for you, or don't pay attention to that because I'm doing this, look over here, or ignore it. Anything, like every way that we behave just makes it worse and makes it awkward. It's not how healthy relationships work. And so Paul says, this doesn't work. This whole way of doing things doesn't work. We can't be made right with God in this way. And so he says, and this is what made early Christianity the unreligion. He says, but now, and Paul always talked this way, like there is a way that things have always been, but something has happened now that has changed everything. But now God has shown us a way to be made right and righteous with him apart from the religious system, the law, even though the law and the prophets actually bore witness to it. Don't miss the What is the Bible seminar coming up May 24th and 25th. Even though the whole story was pointing to it, it is apart from that system a way of being made right with God through the faithfulness of Jesus the Messiah for all who are placing their faith or putting their trust and full allegiance in him. And here's what he's saying. In other words, we could not bridge the divide on our side. Everything we do just fails and looks pathetic and makes everything worse. And so God has bridged the divide from his side, not our great faithfulness, but the faithfulness of the Messiah. God has done for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And here's what the first followers of Jesus had come to believe, that God himself had actually come to us. That God himself had come to us, kind of like Soren Kierkegaard's famous fable of the great king who loved a peasant maiden, and he decides that ultimately, in order to have the relationship with her that he so wanted, he left his throne and became a peasant in order to have the relationship, the loving relationship with her that he so deeply longed for, that God himself has actually come to us and become one of us, and that he took upon himself the whole heap of humanity's sin, everything that was messed up with us, and in fact, the dark power of capital S sin itself, and he became the bridge. He himself became the bridge, and the Father runs across the bridge and scoops us up in his arms and says, "You're mine." And the difference between this very unreligious idea and religion is really well illustrated by comparing side by side a parable or a story that Jesus told with a very similar story found in Buddhist literature. And in both stories, there are sons who become rebellious and who leave home and utterly shame the families. And both these cultures are very much honor-shame cultures. And so this is a big deal, bring shame to the household and shame to the family, and then later recognize the error of their ways and decided to return. And in the Buddhist story, the rebellious son is required to work off the penalty of his past misdeeds and the shame that he caused by years of servitude. And so in the story, there's mercy because many in that culture would actually think accepting the son back at all would not be allowable. So there's mercy, he's accepted back, but at the same time, there's justice, right? Like, it's fair. He has to pay it back, and he should. That's right. In fact, everybody listening to Jesus' story when he told it expected that that's the way the story should end. There was a similar story actually in Jewish literature at the same time as well. That's the way the story it should end. All moralizing stories in Jesus' day in the ancient world ended. Somebody did a bad thing, bad things happened to him. Don't be the bad guy. Don't do that because bad things will happen to you. It doesn't get good, right? And so Jesus' story, though, the conclusion of his story is as radically different from that story as religion is from relationship. And in Jesus' story, the father takes off running to greet his son. When he sees him far away, runs to meet him. It's not like, I'm saying, you come to me. Like, after what you did, in fact, crawling on your hands and knees with tears dripping down your cheeks would not hurt your situation right now. Like, no, you come to me. He takes off running, meets his son, wraps his arms around him, starts kissing him. His son, before he can even get a decent apology out, the father's already calling back to the house, bring a robe for my boy and sandals for his feet. And oh yeah, the family signet ring, put it back on his finger. It is full reinstatement as his son before he's proven a thing. Think about that. After all he's done, before he's regained trust. Well, don't you? And honestly, I don't even know if that's smart. I don't know if I would advise someone to do that. Like, maybe you should give him a few months, let him prove. Like, don't we talk like that? You need to rebuild trust. Just immediately, the father has embraced and he's reinstated completely. God has bridged the divide. That's the story. God has bridged the divide, and Paul continues, God has shown us a way of being made right with God for everyone. He says, everyone has sinned. No big surprise there. We all inclusive, fall short of the glory of God. We are all in the same boat. We are all in the same need, unable to do anything for ourselves, and we are all lacking God's glory. And in Paul's story, part of what that meant was the glory that we were actually created for, that we were created as human beings in the image of God, and we have fallen from that and therefore are falling short of what it means to be human, what it means to be the images of God in this world, glorious as we are created to be. We have all fallen short of the glory that came from God, and we are all inclusive, all made right and righteous, no matter who you are, seriously, or what you've done, or where you're from, or what you've believed, or what you haven't done, and what you haven't believed. We are all made right and righteous and glorious freely by the grace. This is just grace. This is something we could not do for ourselves that has been done for us through the redemption, and that word in Paul's context referred to the manumission fee paid to deliver or free a slave. We have all been set free. The price has been paid for us. The redemption that comes through Jesus, the Messiah. This is not about trying harder to become something you'll never be and something you could not be. This is us surrendering to an act of full trust, surrendering to something that God has done and is doing in us and for us that we cannot do for ourselves, restoring our glory, redeeming our lives, transforming us from the inside out into the people we are created to be. This is grace. This is grace. It's all grace. In fact, and he puts it this way in another letter. Similarly, he says, for it is by, and there's that word again, it's by grace that you've been rescued or saved through your faith or trust, not from ourselves. And he says the whole thing again, same thing. It is the gift of God. It is grace. It is gift, not by works that you do, so that no one can boast, no one can ever pound their chest, no one can ever feel superior to another human being or look down on anyone else. Rather, we all recognize that we are God's handiwork. This is God's handiwork, or sometimes that's translated God's workmanship, his work product, if you will. We are something that God has done, and God is doing, not that we are doing. We are his new creations in Christ Jesus. And then he adds this idea to do good works, to do good things, which God has actually prepared in advance for us to do, like built into who we are created to be is a goodness and an overflow of our lives that is intended for us and that we are created for. The byproduct, in other words, of a life that is invaded by grace, that really gets this, is an abundance of good doings. Just an overabundance, like this life that now just overflows with gratitude and generosity and humility and goodness and compassion, that's overflowing with that because of what has been done for us. Never in order to, not in order to get to God or try to get him to be happy with us today, but because God has already loved me more than I will ever be loved. Has already accepted me and he can't accept me more. Because he has already embraced me, because he is already restoring me, because of, which is, by the way, exactly how healthy relationships work, am I right? That loving people do things, loving things for one another, never in order to, always, because of, and the because of makes all the difference. The thing itself could be the same thing, but doing it in order to, rather than because of, changes the shape of the deed. And this, by the way, just as a side note, this whole story is one of the main reasons why I follow Jesus. This is one of the big things for me, why I've embraced this very unreligious path, that it just resonates with me, that if there is actually a God, which I believe for other reasons, then as counterintuitive and as unreligious, and quite frankly, you need to know this, as actually ungodlike as it would seem, counter to every conception of deity in the history of religions, this is the most undeified, ungodlike thing that any deity would ever do. But yeah, the most relationally healthy being in the universe just might do something so self-giving, so self-debasing, so sacrificial, so relational, so loving as that. And then invite us. Never compel us, never force us, but invite us to join him. Invite us to join him in his right side up, making things right, world-renewing, people-restoring, relationship-reconnecting movement, that he might just come to us and say, are you in? Do you want a piece of this? Do you trust me? Do you trust me? All are made right and righteous and glorious freely, all in the same boat, all with the same need, unable to do for ourselves, all unfathomably loved by God. All the same. And God has done something that we cannot do for ourselves, that religion cannot do for us. He has done something for us all to restore us all, and he is inviting us all and welcoming us all to join him. And so it may surprise you that it's because of these really big revolutionary ideas that early Christianity was actually the most diverse and inclusive movement by far that human history had ever seen. It was the most diverse and inclusive movement in the history of humanity. This is a matter of historical record. The evidence is so overwhelming. The number of books written on this topic alone could fill a number of bookshelves. The doors were open to everybody. It was crazy. Nothing like this actually existed in the ancient world. The movement was often opposed and despised and ridiculed because of it. It crossed every line, every barrier, ethnicity, culture, geography, class, status, wealth, age, gender. Nothing came close. It was scandalous. They created communities where wealthy, even uber wealthy and incredibly poor people, women and men, free and slaves, educated and uneducated, Jewish people, Greek background people, barbarians were actually in the same room, in the same community, eating together at the same time and treating each other as equals. And they called each other, and this is kind of old hat to us, it was new, brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters, back in a time when family and what that meant actually carried some implications to it. Paul, in another letter he wrote to one of these Christian communities, said it this way. And here he's like, hey, us guys in this community, there is neither Jew nor Greek. That doesn't matter here. Neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, for you're all one. You are all one in Christ Jesus. Again, in another letter, he's talking about how the image of God, how God's glorious image is being restored in us. And he says this, here, and again, he's saying the same thing. In this community, there is neither Greek nor Jew, one of the ancient world's great ethnic divides, two ethnicities that were never in the same room together. That doesn't happen with us. Circumcised or uncircumcised, another way of saying that same thing. Barbarian, which is a way that Greek-speaking people referred to anybody who didn't speak Greek. So most of us would be barbarians, maybe all of us. Scythians, which referred to a group of tribes up around the Black Sea that were considered especially barbaric. Slave, he's like, yeah, that doesn't, those classes, those lines don't matter here. Slave or free, but it's the Messiah. It's Christ. Christ is everything. He is all, and he is in all of us. And this idea, the diversity and inclusivity, was so well known in the ancient world that one of the earliest opponents of Christianity, a 2nd century Greek philosopher named Celsus, criticized Christianity, especially because of it, calling it a movement of slaves, women, and little children. And he did not mean that as a compliment to the diversity and inclusivity of the movement. That was not a value. It's an insult to the movement. And Christians were like, yeah, that's who we are. It's everyone is welcome, and everyone is treated equally and with love and grace. Early Christianity was the most diverse and inclusive movement in the history of humanity, and just as a BTW, it actually still is. It actually still is, believe it or not. Any idea of Christianity being some kind of primarily Western or certainly white or middle class religion is seriously lacking the facts. Christianity has been growing for the last way more than 100 years, far more in the non-West than in the West. In fact, Africa, South America, the Far East, the Middle East, places right now like Iran and Afghanistan, here's a fact for you, there are more Anglicans, which refers to a branch of Christianity that grew out of England. There are more Anglicans worshiping today in each of the nations of Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and South of Africa than in all of England, where it came from, and the United States combined. Any one of those countries has more of those people worshiping them in them. There are more Presbyterians today worshiping in Ghana than in U.S. and Scotland combined, which is where Presbyterianism came from. China is now well over 10% Christians. There are more Christians gathered worshiping Jesus today in China than in the entire continent of Europe, and experts expect China to be a majority Christian nation by 2050, which is expected to have a significant impact on global politics. Yale law professor and leading African-American intellectual Stephen Carter says, and I quote him, there is a difficulty that's endemic to today's secular left, an all too frequent weird refusal to acknowledge the demographics of Christianity. He points out that in the United States, black women are the most Christian demographic, while, quote, around the world, the people most likely to be Christians are women of color. And he's saying this to say, hey, when you mock Christians, be careful who you think you're mocking is actually not who you're mocking. In fact, the average face of global Christianity today is not a white suburban male, but a 20-something Nigerian woman. Christianity was, and it is still by far, the most diverse and inclusive movement that history has ever seen. And it's all rooted in this radical, very unreligious idea that we're all in the same boat. We all have the same need, all unable to do anything about it for ourselves, all unfathomably loved by God, all the same. And that God has done something that we cannot do and that religion cannot do, and he has done it for us all to restore us all. We are all made right and righteous freely, by grace, by God, through the faithfulness of Jesus the Messiah, not our own faithfulness, and all are invited And everybody is welcome. And so are you. So am I. All invited to go, I'm in. I say yes. I'll trust you to embrace this righteousness that we cannot bestow upon ourselves and to join the movement. And so with that, I want to close this in prayer and maybe offer you an opportunity just to say to your Heavenly Father, I'm in. I am so in. Maybe for you, it's the umpteenth time you've said that. I am so in. Father, you love me. You ran across the bridge to wrap your arms around me. I say yes to you. I say yes to you again and again and again. And maybe for you, you're like my friend Bill, and he had a lot of questions, and he was ready. And that day, he was like, yeah, I get that. I'm in. And maybe that's where you're at. And you can just say right now, right where you sit, there's no magic words. There's no religious formula. I'm in. I'm in. I say yes to you. I join you in your people renewing, world restoring, relationship reconnecting, all things being made right movement. Sign me up. I will follow you. I trust you. I trust you. I trust you. Heavenly Father, thank you for grace. Thank you for not leaving us to our own devices. Thank you for not leaving us with the mess that we've made, for doing everything required to restore us and renew us. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for loving us far better and far healthier than we will ever be able to love you back. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Thanks, John. Such good news. Hey, have you guys liked this series that we've been in? It's been a really good series, hasn't it? It's super helpful, and we've got one more week left. That's next weekend, and so you won't want to miss that. Hey, before you guys buzz on out of here, let me just give you just a little bit of the lay of the land here from this moment forward. As you leave here, we just love to get that Connect card that Ashley talked to you about, and so we've got our guest service folks that are there at the door. They got a basket. You go ahead and put the Connect card there. If you've got a giving envelope, you can put that there as well. Or if you want to recycle your program, just goes all goes in the basket. That'll be fine. And as you walk out, make sure that you hit the Kids Feeding Kids table. And while you're doing that, as you're kind of thinking about that seminar that John talked about, scan the QR code. You've also got the QR code on your program, and we do need you to sign up for the seminar on the Bible. So make sure that you do that. And again, walking out, sign up for Kids Feeding Kids. Hear more about that at the table, and then you're going to be moving outside to the patio where we've got our barbecue going on. So get ready for a great meal. It's going to be fun. And the way for you to get ready is make sure that you wear a name tag. That'll help. Get in line, meet some people, and just spend a little bit of time getting to know some people outside, around the table, eating some food, talking about your, like the crazy stuff your mom said. You can go ahead and keep that thing going, and we'll have a great time outside. And so enjoy that time, and then we'll see you all next week. God bless you guys. Have a great week.